The first time I heard my nephew Josh say those words, I didn't think they would change everything. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the kind that makes you want to kick back with a cold drink and forget the world. I had just settled into my old rocking chair on the porch when he came running up the driveway, his sneakers kicking up small clouds of dust, his hair wild from the wind. "Uncle Brian," he called, breathless and grinning, his eyes sparkling with some secret excitement. "Can I tell you something?" I smiled, tipping my baseball cap back a little. "Sure thing, buddy. What's on your mind?" Josh was only 9, but he had this way of talking that made you feel like you were the most important person in the world at that moment. He plopped down beside me on the porch step, legs swinging, and leaned close like he was about to let me in on the greatest mystery known to mankind. "I have a wish," he said, his voice low and serious. "And I want you to help me with it." I raised an eyebrow. "A wish, huh? Like a birthday wish?" He shook his head. "Nope. Real wish. One I've been thinking about forever." That caught my attention. Josh was the kind of kid who wanted to be a paleontologist one day and a magician the next, but something about his tone made me sit up a little straighter. "All right," I said slowly. "What's this wish of yours?" He looked up at me, his face suddenly unsure. "Promise you won't laugh." "Scout's honor," I said, making the little hand gesture even though I'd never been a scout. He took a deep breath. "I want to find my dad." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Josh had never known his father. My sister, Karen, had raised him alone since he was born. His dad, Eric, had left before Josh was even a year old, and we hadn't heard from him since. Karen had always been honest but protective. She told Josh his dad wasn't ready to be a parent and that sometimes people leave, but that didn't mean they don't care in their own way. But she never painted him as a villain either. She just kept living, working 2 jobs, and making sure Josh had everything he needed. "I want to find him," Josh repeated, softer now. "I just have questions. You know." I nodded, feeling a weight settle in my chest. "I know, kiddo. And I thought maybe you could help me. Mom would freak out if I asked her, and I don't want to make her sad. But you're like the coolest adult I know." I chuckled despite the emotion swirling in me. "Flattery will get you everywhere." Josh grinned again, but his eyes held that same serious glint. "So, will you help me?" I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, thinking about Karen, about what it might mean to dig up someone who'd walked away so long ago, about what Josh might find, or not find. But then I looked at him again, this kid who'd never asked for anything outrageous, who was always polite, always kind. And I realized I couldn't say no. "All right," I said finally. "We'll look." His face lit up with a joy I hadn't seen in a long time. He threw his arms around me and shouted, "Thank you, Uncle Brian." That night, after Josh had gone to bed and Karen was in the kitchen sipping her tea, I sat down beside her and told her everything. At first, she was quiet, staring down into her mug like it held all the answers. Then she let out a long sigh. "I always knew this day would come," she said. "I didn't promise him anything concrete," I added quickly. "Just that I'd help look." She nodded slowly. "He deserves to know the truth. But if you find Eric, just be careful. For Josh's sake." "I will," I said, meaning it. The search wasn't easy. I spent nights combing through old emails, social media, and whatever online databases I could access. I even reached out to a few old friends who might have known Eric back in the day. For a while it felt like chasing shadows. Josh would ask me every few days if there was any news, and I'd gently tell him I was working on it. Then 2 weeks later I got a hit. An old co-worker of Eric's said he'd seen him working at an auto shop in a small town 2 hours away. The name matched. The face, on the shop's website, looked older, tired but familiar. I debated for a day whether to go alone or take Josh. In the end, I decided to check it out myself first. Karen agreed. "Make sure he's someone Josh should meet." When I pulled into the auto shop the next morning, my heart was pounding. I walked in, trying to act like any other customer, and asked for Eric. A man stepped out from the back, wiping his hands on a rag. When he saw me, his eyes narrowed in confusion, then widened in recognition. "Brian," he said slowly. "Hey, Eric," I said. "It's been a long time." He looked like he'd aged a decade for every year that had passed. But he still had that same voice, that same crooked smile. We sat in his cluttered office, and I told him everything. About Josh, about his wish. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "I thought about him every day. But I was a mess back then. I didn't think I could be a father. Still don't know if I can. Maybe it's not about being perfect," I said. "Maybe it's just about showing up now." He asked to meet Josh. I told him I'd have to talk to Karen and Josh first. That night, Josh sat across from me, his legs bouncing under the table. "Did you find him?" "I did," I said. "But it's up to you if you want to meet him. And up to your mom." Karen was silent for a moment, then gave a small nod. "If it's what you want, Josh, I'll support you." We drove back to the shop a few days later. Josh was nervous, clutching a picture he'd drawn of himself and a man he imagined as his dad. Eric came out, wiping his hands again, looking like he'd aged another year in just those few days. When he saw Josh, his expression softened. "Hey there," he said gently. Josh looked up at me, then stepped forward. "Hi. Are you my dad?" Eric swallowed hard. Yeah, I am." Josh handed him the drawing. "This is what I thought you might look like." Eric smiled as he took the paper. "You did a pretty good job." They talked for over an hour. About dinosaurs, about soccer, about favorite movies. Eric was awkward at first, unsure, but then something shifted. Maybe it was the way Josh talked to him, like he already believed they could be something more than strangers. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was love. I don't know. In the weeks that followed, they kept in touch. Slowly, carefully. Sometimes with me there. Sometimes with Karen. Eventually, Eric visited our town. He came to one of Josh's soccer games, sat beside Karen and me, and cheered like he'd always been there. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were hard conversations. Tears. But also healing. One evening, as I tucked Josh into bed after another visit from Eric, he looked up at me and said, "Thanks for not saying no." I smiled, brushing his hair back. "You're welcome, buddy." And in that moment I realized that sometimes a wish is more than just a passing thought. Sometimes it's a bridge to something we never thought we'd find again. Family. Forgiveness. Second chance. And I was just grateful to be part of it.